In today's episode, we speak about grief, and there is some vulnerable experiences that are very descriptive. There is a heavy warning that the content will be triggering and uncomfortable for many. I ask you, the listener, to be attuned to your inner terrain. And if some of the information becomes too overwhelming, take a pause. If there's been triggers that have been activated, the strongest thing you can do for yourself is ask for help. The more that we can listen to stories, the more that we can share, is where healing will begin.
Hello.
Hello, my love. It is so lovely to see you.
Really good to see you too. Love your background.
I did the renovations of my bedroom this summer. So I was
great.
Like, since I do a lot of the recordings, I'm like, I'd like a back splash that would actually look presentable and that I actually appreciate. Let's take a breath together.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you for being on the Lift Oneself podcast, Ghazala. I'm really thankful you're here with me.
It's an honor.
How's your heart doing?
Grieving.
Let's hold a moment for that. It's honesty. And in a world where we put on all kinds of masks and try to portray something else, it's like to be authentic with our honesty of exactly what we're experiencing. That's courage.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, thank you for that. What can you thank COVID for?
What can I thank COVID for? For me, it's put into perspective what really matters. I couldn't travel for a couple of years in between to go and see my family back in, Saudi Arabia. And it just showed me how much that mattered, family and, being with the people I love, and how much I took it for granted that I could just get up and travel and go whenever. Oh, it's just a plane flight away type of thing. And it's like, now it's not as simple. And it just brought that into perspective. Among many things, I think it's just prioritizing what really matters. And for me, it's away from work and the busyness. It's being with the people that I love. And so I thank COVID for that, because I think that fast-paced running would have continued maybe.
Yeah. You've recently had to travel during COVID, and It wasn't for pleasure. Could you explain or share how the experience of traveling has been through COVID? Because a lot of people aren't aware how airports are, how it is between countries.
So my first flight, or my flight back to Saudi Arabia, were in, April. And things have been changing over the past months. But back then we had been in fairly strict measures here in Canada. And personally, as a family, we're doing our best to, social distance. And so when we got on the planes at the airports were very busy. Like the plane was packed. And I remember just freaking out, looking around and going there. So I have not been around so many people in such a long time. And I'm in a closed space inside a plane. It was like the fear was so high. I had a box of Lysol wipes with me, and I like frantically wiping down, the what's it called? The tables that you
trays.
eat on, the trays, the seats and whatever, because there were people that were sitting in our seats and they were in the wrong seats. Like, it was complete chaos on that Air Canada flight. And you could see the flight attendants. Everybody on the plane was functioning from, or most people are functioning from a place of fear. It was like each man for themselves, and not a lot of kindness, and then the meals were like in these boxed, things that were thrown at us from a distance, like, here you go, and they'd throw you your meal and you're like, catch. And it's like, what's going on? It was different, so yeah. And of course they wanted you to mask the whole time. I was traveling with young kids. So the challenge of keeping the mask on 14-hour flights is challenging. 3 airports, 3 flights, and then all the measures at the airport. And then on our way back, which was a week ago now, it was also different. So now they're requiring. So in Saudi Arabia, you're required to have double doses of the vaccine to be able to leave the country. So the vaccine passport and the COVID PCRs, and you need all that paperwork with you, along with your passport and others, your legal documents and whatever. Not pleasant, unpleasant. Yeah, it was quite tiring.
Yeah. How was it coming back into Canada?
Hectic. The coming off the flight was very full. It was a full flight to Toronto, and so they only let out the people who had a connecting flight, which was us flying to Edmonton, and other people with us, obviously. But when we landed in the immigration, like the customs hall, I mean, there must have been like 500 people there. It was really busy, long, that maze of lines, and slow, and lots of checking. I mean, I don't know why there were counters that were empty, like that didn't have people working there, even though it was really busy. It took us about 2.5 hours just to get through immigration.
Okay.
And then we were pulled aside after that. Nobody told us anything. We were marked in our declaration form, I suppose, or some way of identifying to the next agents. So then we were pulled aside into a second room to kind of question why we were away for 5 months.
Mm.
Even though we had said, like, my father was unwell and all of that. But it was like, yeah. So again, the functioning from a place of fear and mistrust, like everybody, the air was not very kind. And so we were like, we have a flight in like 45 minutes to Edmonton, like, can someone tell us what's going on? It's like, nope, we don't care. Literally, they said, you're going to have to figure out your connecting flight. And so, yeah, and we were tired after, 14-hour flight, and then a previous flight before that as well. And the kids were crying. And so unpleasant again.
A real challenge. So thank you for sharing that. What the listeners are going to find out is the reason why you had to travel in April. And can you share that?
Yeah. So my father got very sick towards the end of March, unexpectedly. So I didn't think when I was traveling that it would turn out the way it did. I mean, there was always a possibility, but things were really uncertain at that time. And coming back to Canada, like all those emotions came back, because it's like you travel back into time. Coming back here, the house was in the way I'd left it, in a rush, to be with my dad. Even at that time, traveling required a lot of logistics, for my husband, my kids, and myself. It took about 2 or 3 weeks just to get our paperwork in place to travel. So I got there, yeah, around 3 weeks after he got really sick. I mean, at that point, I was hopeful that he would actually get better and come out of the ICU. And, it was Ramadan that we would, spend maybe his last Ramadan with him and with the kids. And so it was very clear to me that I wanted my husband and kids to go with me as well. And I'm glad I listened to that intuition at that time. It was very loud and clear, even though at the time I remember my husband saying, well, do you really, like, if traveling is not easy in COVID, with young kids, that too. And you're going to be busy there. Are you sure? And I'm like, yes, this is like something I'm very sure about. So yeah, got there. He was, they were ready to intubate him again. That's the day I arrived. And they let me see him, before, and talk to him. But I wasn't able to talk much because he was already on the BiPAP and had that tight mask on his face. But at least he was able to see that I'm there, because he had asked about me the week before, after they had taken the tube out the first time around. He's like, where's Ghazala? Is she coming? When is she coming? And that's not very like my dad. He's very much like, oh, don't worry, take care of your life there, we're good. But this time he was like, no, where is she? Ask her to come. And so, there were signs very early on as to where this was headed, but yet at that time it was very uncertain in my head.
Can you explain to the listeners what you experienced in these 5 months?
Oh gosh, so much.
Take a moment. It's deep waters.
It is. It is. And it's all still very, it comes and goes in very vulnerable and raw ways. So he was in the ICU for about 19 or 20 weeks the whole time. My initial thoughts were that, I would go and for the time that he was in ICU and in the hospital, I'd be there. And then if he would come home, we'd set him up with whatever care he needed at home, and I would help them settle in, and then I'd come back. But of course, life has its own direction. And so I think the biggest lesson there for me was to take it day by day, because I really couldn't plan ahead. Like it was like there was no way to plan ahead and say, okay, this is what we're going to do. Because he would get better for a little bit, and then every week there would be a new complication, and then he'd get worse again. So we were on this sort of roller coaster, and we, as my mom and my siblings, my brothers and myself, my husband, just these waves of like hope and then fear, anticipating the loss. Like, is it going to be this week? Is it going to be today? And he went through some really serious complications, like what was it? 3 surgeries, lots of procedures, and each of these events that he had were life-threatening. So every time he would go into a surgery, I would say my goodbyes, and like, look at him, this might be the last time we get to interact. And, so there was all of that going on. I'm very grateful for my husband's support. He was holding the fort, because I was very much absorbed and taken by all this. There was nothing else I could really do. I didn't see friends much, or family. I would, get up in the morning, prepare myself to go. So I'd have to sit and pray and meditate and just gather energy every day just for that day, because I couldn't do more than a day at a time. And then I'd go there and be with him, talk to the physicians. There was a lot of, healthcare systems are burnt out and people are depleted. There's compassion fatigue. And for us, this is our loved one and very dear. And for them, it's like, the 100th patient they've seen that month. And it's like, the clashing of expectations. And then, working with people who are really tired. So the day would be about, just going, seeing him. He wasn't able to talk because he had been intubated 3 times, and then they had done the tracheostomy, and the tube. So he was on the ventilator a lot, and he never really got to a point where they were able to change the tube so that he could actually talk. And it wasn't actually in the beginning. It wasn't given priority. The priority was more about, okay, we're saving his life, we're doing this, we're doing that. Whereas as family members, and I get that as a physician, but as a family member, I'm like, there's other things that are important here. Like the fact that he couldn't talk to us, I think that was one of the most devastating things for me. It's like, you have this person who would wake up and he'd be alert, he would recognize us, he would try to speak, but there would be no sound would come out of his mouth. So he'd be, just trying to speak like that. We'd be lip reading and saying, okay, are you saying this? Is this what you're saying? And then he'd just get frustrated and say, I'm just not even going to try. And that was just so, like, that was hard to see. I think that was one of the hardest things for me. And I keep reflecting on that. I wonder why that part really gets to me, not having your voice. And my own voice kind of faded there. That part for me was the hardest, because like, if you can't even express your pain or your grief or your sadness or your frustration or what have you, or your love or your last wishes, and you're trapped in your own body in this room. Like, to me, that's one of the worst things that a human being can experience. It was 19 weeks of that.
Did you get to hear your father's voice before he went into ICU?
No. Well, I mean, on the video calls here when I was still in Canada, we had a conversation on the 25th of March. That was our last, real conversation, as in there was back and forth. And that was where I looked at him and I said, you're not giving up, are you? And he's like, because there was a question of lymphoma diagnosis at that time. And he's like, no, 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 don't worry. We've got this and I'm not ready to go. And so that was our last conversation, I think. And he said, I'm ready to face whatever is coming. And we kind of went by that, that he wanted everything done and he wanted to live. And so we kind of took that as his last wishes.
Mm-hmm.
That was my last conversation. But then he was on the 26th of March was when he was first intubated. I came around I arrived mid-April. So by that time, the speaking aspect was not ever on the top of the list of the healthcare team. Up until the end, like that's when they said, someone finally came in and said, we need to start changing the tube so that he can talk. But at that time, he was so frail, so sick, and there were so many secretions, and his lungs were just not able to, like, it was either he talks or he breathes. Like, what a trade-off,
Yeah. Like you said, being trapped in the body and trying to communicate and nobody understands the language that you're trying to say or what you're experiencing, or even being able to ask for help or give indication. For the listeners to understand too, your father was a doctor.
Yes.
So understanding the medical field and being able to give some insights and not being able to do that, feeling like a prisoner. Can you describe how you had to learn to communicate with him in the 19 weeks?
I keep, there's a sentence that my dad used to say when my kids were younger that kept, and this makes me emotional.
You're safe. Take your time.
He would always say, when my kids were younger and they weren't able to speak yet or have the language to say and express, he would say, he would pray and say, this is a difficult time for them, because they can't express fully what they need to say. And he would say, I hope God makes it easier. And I found that just so different from anyone who had ever kind of interacted with kids in front of me. So really realizing the depth of that, the compassion. So they're crying and they're expressing whatever way they can. So he was very patient and gentle, in that. And he would always say, may God ease this time for them. This is a difficult time until they're able to speak and say what they want. And that kept, those words kept swirling in my head, and I would be standing next to him. And I even said that to him. I said, you taught me, something really valuable about not being able to express. And so I would say those words back to him, and say, like, may God ease this time for you of not being able to express. He nodded, and I had tears in my eyes. I always get really emotional when I think of this particular statement, because it touches somewhere really deep as to how compassionate and just insightful, my father was.
I'd say is. He's still here in a different way.
Yes. And so I learned from there. That was probably my starting point, was realizing how hard this was. And then just being brave, finding courage to stay there anyway, to try anyway, to understand. And out of all of us, I understood him the most because I stayed there the most and I tried. I want to say I probably had the most courage to actually be there at his bedside and learn, this new way of communicating, that when he's saying this, he's probably in pain, and this is what he's trying to say. And yeah, so it was hard, it was really hard. But we managed somehow. I was able to speak, and tell him how much I loved him, and like how wonderful his presence has always been in my life. I said, if there was ever a best father award, it should go to you. There was like, he never had a beard, but of course in hospital there was like, he'd grown a beard, and I said, you actually look really distinguished in that. It looks good on you. You're always hesitant to ever grow a beard, but you really look good with a beard. So he'd smile, like we, there was a little bit of normal communication. So yeah, but it was like, okay, if you're in pain, squeeze my hand, because he wasn't able to move his legs anymore, but he still had strength in his hands. And of course, because he would often pull out things, they would physically restrain a lot. And so when I'd be able to visit, I would open the restraints and let him use his hands. And I'd be like, how? And that's the part that always got to me, because I was like, how else can he communicate? When you tie him down, what else does he do? He can't speak and he can't use his hands. Like, it felt so harsh to me. And they'd be like, well, he keeps pulling out things, and then we have to redo the NG tube, and that's very hard on him too. It's like, okay, what do you pick? And then you'd have to just pray and hope and speak to the nurses that they would, find the compassion in their hearts to pay attention and see from his facial expressions and things if he was in pain or other things. And then the part of being his voice, having to advocate on his behalf, like he's in pain. He needs more pain medication. Like, and they would forget sometimes. They'd forget to put him on pain meds, and like that would be horror for me. I'm like, wow, really? He just had a surgery, and you've forgotten to put him on regular pain meds? Like, are you kidding me? And they'd be like, oh, he's agitated. I'm like, he's not agitated, he's in pain. When he's moving like this, he's telling you he's in pain. Like, someone needs to pay attention. And so that was part of the suffering of this, was just the helplessness. And then it just went on for 19 weeks. It's like at the end we were like, when is this going to be over?
Mm-hmm.
Can't do this anymore.
Yeah, it's a lot. I ask you, the listener, to be attuned to your inner terrain. And if some of the information becomes too overwhelming, take a pause. If there's been triggers that have been activated, the strongest thing you can do for yourself is ask for help. Can you give your definition of what grieving is now?
I think, to me, grieving it's that part of a relationship that occurs after someone dies. So there's phases of like being in love or whatever, getting to know someone. And then, I think there's the phase I'm experiencing, that there's this phase that happens after someone's gone, and that can only be lived after they're gone. Like, there's this depth of love and realization of the influence and presence and importance and the gratitude and everything that comes with that person, that can only be experienced after they're gone, because there's some element of taking that for granted while they're still around. Like, there's just no way you're going to feel that unless they're actually gone. And so grieving to me is just is love. It's a phase of love. There's a lot of pain in it, but I think it's every much as part of life as living is. It's as much as part of life as joy is. It's an honorable thing. I think it requires courage, but to me, it's sacred, so it's a sacred. So if you would say definition, I'd say it's a sacred way of being with the person that you love in a different phase of it, a different experience of it, where they're not with you in the physical dimension like they used to be, yet they're still very much with you. And then to honor that in ways that are not always welcomed, I think, by people around us and by society who want you to just quickly move on with life. I get this statement is said a lot to me. Okay, now when you go back to Canada, you get to move on with life. I'm like, but this is life. This is very much life.
How are you noticing the language that people use that may feel like it diminishes the grief, or that pain is just supposed to be brushed aside? Or do you notice anything?
Yes. I've been fortunate to have friends like you and other people in my life who hold space for the grief and the pain, and they're not afraid of it because they've done the same for themselves. But then there's a lot of other people are not as comfortable being around pain, or there seems to be a time limit to it. So in the beginning, when he first, like, he's been gone for like what 50 days now. So the first week, it was as if it was more permissible, to be in that state of mourning and crying. But when it happens now, like how I got emotional a little while ago, if that happens around other people, there's this sort of fear in them that it's almost like, okay, when are you going to get over this and get on with your life? Like I can see that the sort of the judgment, and it comes from a good place. It does, it comes from a place of concern, but it's not very helpful. It's not, it feels isolating. Because then all you do is, it's not that you don't, like, you quickly get over it, you just stop sharing with them. Those parts don't come up with certain people. And so you're like, oh yeah, things are fine, whatever. And it's not really the truth, but it's what this person, their expectation of you. So, and there's a lot of this whole, well, he lived a full life and, he was 76 and, you had your father for so long, and there's others who have never had fathers, and da da da. And yeah, there's a lot of that as well.
The comparison trap. I don't know why we have to use comparison and rather just sit with what are we actually feeling.
Yeah.
I can see where this fake positivity or fake gratitude to act like as if gratitude cannot have pain and sadness to it.
Mm-hmm.
Like gratitude is only supposed to be all elated, happy. And it's like, it's all one spectrum. It's not one or the other. It's part of it. So when you see me smiling, know that there's a depth of sadness behind there. I'm just choosing to be in this part of it right now. Yet I'm not ignoring the other part that's there.
Mm-hmm.
I guess it's part of our ignorance that if we haven't witnessed our own pain, when we see other people's stuff, we're like, oh, no, don't ignite the stuff that's in me because I don't want to have to deal with my stuff. So I do understand, and already in society, we do not have context. We're not allowed to show emotions and just put on this certain mask that you can get through things and not show any kind of sensitivity or emotions. And I believe now we're seeing the detriment of that. We're seeing how chaotic things are becoming in professions and institutions and systems. And it's like our emotions and our feeling process has been bypassed for too long that now it's coming up to the surface. Thank you for being honest about it. And it's difficult, I'm sure. How do you care for yourself when those soft, sensitive spots of your father are touched?
I think the first thing I'm like very clear in my head about giving the feelings, giving the grief space. It's regardless of what people are saying around me, or, even my husband at times, even though we've both grown through this, and that's been really one of the gifts of this experience. I'm very intentional and clear in my mind about where I'm holding space for that. So, and because I'm very clear about that, I don't have this need to necessarily be open or like angry or like have these harsh boundaries, because they're there for me. Like, it's like, okay, you guys might not understand, but I do, and I honor this. And so that has been very like it's been like an act of love for myself, this tender holding inside me. And I do, and then I take cues from my body and I go with it. So I've been really pacing myself, Um, I asked for time from work to be off for all this while that I was there. Very grateful that I was given that time off. I mean, it was unpaid time, but yet, I still have the job and it was time away. And I asked for more time after he passed, so about 6 weeks. And part of that was to I knew that the waves would be intense, like, and I could foresee that, and so I made room for it, intentional. And then even after arriving back in Canada, I still have a few days before I get back to work. And so this was all very intentional pacing. I know that not everyone perhaps has, the luxury of doing this or the space to do this, but the message is probably to honor that and give it to yourself in whatever way is possible. And so for me, this is what was available. And I gave it to myself. There's a little part in me that kept saying, that was going with the social conditioning. Well, you need to get back to work so that you can get busy. But like the majority of me is like, yeah, that's not the version of the story I go with anymore. And so this path looks different. And I look around me, I find very few people who have made space for grief the way I have and for loss. I've also gotten a lot of messages from friends going, wow, like you're really teaching us how to do this. This is different, but there wasn't really role modeling around me to do this. But in my heart, felt like this is what I need to do. I'm grateful for the years preceding this year, where the whole mindfulness and self compassion, and that has really practically come into effect in this way. That's what I do. And there's days when I need to sleep for 8 or 10 hours. I sleep for 8 or 10 hours. I'm very grateful that my husband and even the kids, it's like when you honor and give yourself that worth and that space, the world shifts itself around you. So work, my friends, everyone shifted slowly. And they're like, okay, she needs the space and we're going to help her. So like even my son would be, Zidane says like, okay, mom, I was like, oh, I'm really stressed the other day and maybe I should go to a hotel and spend a few days, a couple days away and maybe I need a spa or whatever. He's like, I have a great idea. You can go to your bedroom, it won't bother you. You've got your bathtub and whatever, and you can make your hotel and your spa right there. We'll be really quiet, promise. I'm like, look at that, and they did.
Yeah. And it's great that you're now advocating for what you need and not being afraid of it and not creating those walls of boundaries too, of being rigid and I got to run away or get. It's just expressing what it is that you need and allowing and trusting those that would support you in that. You mentioned your children. How are the conversations around death with them?
I find the little ones, so they're 4 going on 5, are not scared of death. It's very much very normal for them, almost like it's like, okay, yeah, people go back to God. Like, what's there to fear about that? And it's interesting to see that, because in my mind, it feels like the fear aspects are maybe something we build around it because it's so unknown. As we get older, we build our own thoughts around what it could be. So that aspect, they're not like, they don't ask me a lot of questions as to, I have a lot of questions, where is he now and what's he doing? And for them, it's like there's this acceptance of he's gone back. And Zidane, when he was younger, used to say to me, why are people so afraid of death? Like, this is where we came from and this is where we go back to. So why is there this fear? And I'd always smile and say, like, that's a really interesting question. I don't know. I think it's because we are afraid of what we no longer remember, perhaps, or we're not in touch with. And so it's scary. In the beginning, like when he first passed, I told my kids, I sat them down and I said, your grandpa has died. And because they would ask me, how's he doing? Can you ask the doctors, when is he going to get better? The little ones, they're 4. They were quite expressive. in their sadness, like the facial expressions. And then when I told her, this is Juri, my daughter,
Mhm.
I said, he died. She said, "Oh, Mom, I'm really sad." And then she looked at me and she said, "And how are you?" I said, "I'm really sad too." And then she said, "And how are your brothers?" And it's like I was really kind of taken aback that she's 4 years old, but just the emotional connection of asking immediately, "How are you? And how are your brothers?" And I said, "Yeah, we're all sad, and it's okay to be sad." So just kind of wanting to give them that space again to. So they talk about him a lot. They say they've seen him around. I've mentioned that a few times, that they've seen him in the apartment and he's come and he goes, and then I say, "Are you making that up?" And they're like, "No, we're not." And sometimes they say, "Yes, we are," because we miss him so much and this is what we want to happen. And so, it's like, I don't think it really matters. They are expressing their love in that way. Zidane, who's almost 10, had a different reaction. He's very quiet. And so he didn't cry much or speak much until about a few weeks later. He had this one night where he was very restless all night and just very angry, and got up in the middle of the night and was pacing and said, "I have all this energy, Mom. I don't know what to do with it." And so I said, "Okay, well, are you sad, or do you want to speak about it?" He's like, "Oh, I don't know." And it was more of like anger and frustration. And then he cried. He doesn't express much in words. He's just with emotions.
Do you see a need to having conversations about death with children?
I do. I think, I mean, in, age appropriate ways, I would say, like whatever, and child appropriate, as in like different children, I think, have different understanding and level of comprehension of it. But I do think it's important because, I mean, there's a lot of fear that's created around not ever talking about it, or being assured as a child that "I promise you I'll always be there for you." Well, you don't really know that. And I remember, being 9 and looking at my parents and saying, "But you don't, like, how, you don't know that though, that you're always going to be here for me." Like, that does not reassure me at all. And it just
Yeah.
feels like a big lie. So then why wouldn't you tell me the truth? So I do think that this whole taboo around talking about death, even as adults, like, we don't really want to talk about it. And I'm like, but it's the only truth that we are certain of. Why would we not make it a bit more normal? It doesn't have to be morbid and depressing. Make it a little more acceptable. And
I think it's fascinating that it's something that, like you said, is an absolute truth, that we know the physical part, there will be an ending to it. Yet, for some reason, people cannot just speak of the facts of it. Like you said, there's this morbid, or it feels like if you talk about it, you're going to bring it on, or there's a curse of it, and it's like, no, this is something that we need to speak about so that we can start to process how we're going to interact with ourselves. Because when we act like it's a foreign thing and it's never going to happen, and then bang, it hits us, it's like, what is this thing? I've never even had verbiage or communication or tried to even talk out my understanding of this,
yeah,
or try to relate with other people with this.
I can imagine and relate to some of why people would be afraid of talking about death. You know, I've had times in the last few weeks where it becomes this obsessing thing, and the fear of death. And then looking at people around me, the fear of it could occur to my husband, my kids, and what would my life look like if I didn't have them, and that sort of panic attack. And so I want, maybe that's what people don't know, how to work with that and what to do with it when it comes up. And so then they'd rather just not talk about it at all, or
Mhm.
have to face it. And I'm been sort of navigating that myself as well, as to when those thoughts come up and I start going into this panic mode of this is a very real thing that could happen at any time. And then where do I go from there? And so I always remember Brene Brown's words for that one, where she says, leaning into those moments of vulnerability, realizing you're feeling like this because these are people in your life that you love so much, and then to lean into that, and rather than going into the path of fear, going into sort of the love and gratitude you have for them, and that let me then make the most of my time here. Let me live those moments with them with what really matters. Like if the little ones are eating with their hands or whatever, like who cares? Use that to put it into perspective of what really matters. Just kind of channel that energy. So, but then you can't really, you can talk about this for as long as you want, unless you've actually done that. Like you've gone to that place of fear and panic for myself. And then from there, channeled it into, the preciousness of the love, the fragility of it all, the impermanence of these experiences, and realizing that it's truly miraculous that when we're having these moments with each other.
Mhm.
And so to bring yourself back to that, and then to not worry about or obsess about how am I going to make it through without them, because there's no way you can really prepare for that. And to trust that if you live fully showing up for those moments, that if that time comes for them to transition, or maybe you do before them or whatever, that you will be given what you need at that time.
Mhm.
You can't see that yet because you're not in that yet. It's a whole training of sorts. And I think that if that's done earlier in life, as you were saying, you show up for life differently, and your relationships and the people that you interact with, it's going to be a different experience for sure.
Put on to what you just said. It's using that energy when those, it feels like dark thoughts. It is a sincere panic, an overwhelmment of fear, because our nervous system has one function: don't die. And so when it's thinking of other nervous systems that are going to die, that's an overwhelmment. And especially when we have connection, and some of it is attachment. So we understand there's a part of us that is going to react a certain way. And when we can use that energy in the force of appreciating and empowering our choices with intention,
Yeah.
no longer just doing whatever in
Yes.
survival of what other people told us, that we can use that energy to be very intentional with the choices of how we're showing up with these moments and with these people. But I thank you for bringing that up, because it is also too that there's a lot of people that have these thoughts and they don't even know where to share it with people,
Yeah.
because people don't want to talk about it.
Mm-hmm.
And people don't want to feel that, or they don't understand it, because their mind will not go in those kind of depths.
Mm-hmm.
And so there are a lot of people that it's like, oh, it's not just me that obsess or can loop into this. And it's like, no, there's many, if they go into the depths of certain places or have experienced things. And there's a way of channeling that energy in a way that you can empower your choices with intention.
Absolutely. There's something that my mom said recently that fits in this part of the conversation. She said this whole time in life, like there was this sense of I'm doing this for the future, I'm doing this for the future, as if the future was extending itself. And she's like, it's not extending itself. It's actually coming towards, like closing in. And you're actually not going beyond. Like it's like so she said, stay aware of that, because here I am at the end of it all, from after my dad passed. And she says, I'm like, I thought there was still more to go, but there isn't. And I was saving stuff for this future. And actually it's one day less of your life every day. And sure, you plan ahead and all of that, but we really do plan ahead. I know for myself, as if you're going to live for this extended amount of time, and like you're buying time. Time is regressing physically as we know it in this dimension. It's like it's a different way of living when you think about it that way. And again, not morbidly obsessing and going all, crazy over it, but just realizing, like for me, for sure, there's a sense of moving forward now for whatever time I have remaining for me. I'm very much aware of it now with intention. And again, I'm pacing myself in that. I know moving forward, I have no doubt that life is beginning to look different and will look different for me in terms of the career path and family and all of that.
You recently posted, you mentioned about if you would have known that it was your last time that your father would have been visiting Edmonton, you would not have been so focused on the appearance and the perfection of things.
Yeah. So this is exactly 2 years ago now. My parents were visiting here in Edmonton, and we had just moved to Edmonton. I remember spending so much time organizing the house and unpacking, and this frenzy of frenzied energy, of needing things to be in place and whatever, and and running around doing errands and all that. Now looking back, I'm like, if I had known that that would be his last trip, I probably would have spent more time just sitting next to him drinking tea, because we both love drinking tea, with cardamom and milk, and this tea that we both enjoy. And we would talk about more of the things that I wanted to talk about. He loved talking about history. His life is just so full of all these stories and travels and history. And I would have wanted to hear those again. I miss those so much, And there was always this sense I had, there were actually, now that I'm thinking back, there was a part of me that knew to treasure these moments, like there was a part, because I remember taking some pictures and videos of him and my kids. I knew when I was doing that, but it wasn't here, the front of my mind. It was somewhere in the back. But now when I think back, there was a part of me that was asking me to make those videos and was telling me, you are going to need these in the future. These are videos you will cherish forever. Like I remember that so well. But I didn't really want to pay attention to it. You know what I mean? Like it was just somewhere there. I did the action that it told me to, but I didn't really want to turn around and say, what are you saying here? And I always thought I had more time with him, because my grandmother, his mom, she passed when I was 14, and she was in her 90s. And my uncles, older than him, his brothers, passed in their late 80s. So I'd always say to myself, if their average age, kind of life expectancy for this family, sort of late 80s, I have at least 10 more years with my dad. And maybe in 10 years, I'll be ready, maybe in 10 years, and I'd calculate the age in my mind of how old I would be. And I'd say, I think when I see people who are in that age group, they look a little bit readier. Like, it's like, yeah, no, not really. Because people don't express, they don't show their grief. And so you think people are just cruising along, and it's like, that's not the truth.
What words would you want to offer to others about taking time to appreciate those that you value and love?
Time. There's this horizontal kind of passing of time, from beginning to end. There's also a vertical depth to it. I don't know if that makes sense to people if they hear this or not, but I'm going to say it anyway. There's this vertical sense to time. Like if you drop into the moments, it's like time becomes this 3D or whatever. It's not this flat linear thing. It has depth and dimension to it, and it just becomes fuller. And so that experience, it's the same amount of time. The moments are bigger and fuller. And that sense of fullness at the end of your life, I feel like if you've had that sense of fullness with people that you love and the moments and even if you're by yourself, just appreciating where you are, it's perhaps easier to transition. Because maybe I feel like the regrets I have with my dad, or what I see even as a physician in my career, it's of not having lived fully. It's not about the length of time, it's the fullness of it. So I would say drop into the moment, whatever that looks like for you. Just drop into it and just be there. And you're going to get distracted for sure. And I do all the time. So like I'm saying this, but I don't drop into moments all the time either. It's just, it has to be intentional. But every time I think of it, it's like, okay, what am I doing here? I would like to look at my kids' faces a bit more, actually see them. And then when I do that, I realize, wow, I haven't looked at you like this for a long time. Because even when I see you in front of me, I'm not seeing you. I'm seeing my agenda that I have with you right now. Okay, you need to finish your lunch because then you need to go out and play. And then, there's this, and then there's school, and then there's whatever. So I'm seeing you, but I'm not really fully appreciating you. And so I think as humans, we're definitely going to get busy and distracted. But if there's a few moments of that every day, I think it gives that vertical dimension and the other dimensions to time and life. And every time I do that, I'm less afraid of death.
I ask you, the listener, to be attuned to your inner terrain. And if some of the information becomes too overwhelming, take a pause. If there's been triggers that have been activated, the strongest thing you can do for yourself is ask for help. Can you give me the definition, or how do you define intimacy?
Into me, you see, right? To me, intimacy is really letting the masks and the layers kind of drop, and letting myself be seen. Also having the courage to see the person in front of me, even if there's stuff there that initially I might go and it might reflect back at me as a criticism of me, or like, whoa, that they're saying this to me, and it's like, but can I just drop the armor and be there? And so to me, that's intimacy.
How have you become more intimate with yourself from this experience? Or have you?
There's parts that knock and show up. There's parts that say, I'm really sad and heartbroken right now. I'm really afraid. I'm afraid of my own mortality. I don't want to die. A lot of these different parts. And then there's those parts that gently hold the truth. Like the part that told me to make that video of my dad with the kids. And there's that part that knows the truth as well. Have been a bit scared of, because it doesn't always say things that I want to necessarily hear. It's turning towards those parts now and not distracting them away. So to me, that's being real and being more intimate with myself. And the more I do it, the kinder I can be stepping out in the world. I don't need those those hard, angry boundaries, and by that the physical distancing. I need to do it less and less. I'm finding ways to do that even when, like, the kids are around me and there's all this chaos going on, and previously that noise would be like, okay, can you guys go play somewhere else? Now it's like, okay, I can actually honor whatever's coming up for me and make room for it, and then I don't need to necessarily have them physically leave that space. I mean, not always, but
yeah,
there's times where I still need my space. But so just being more aware of what's coming up, I think, and not being afraid of it. The environment it was in the ICU is very jarring, and nothing pleasant about it. There's monitors and things beeping here and beeping there and lines everywhere. And there were moments of profound spirituality in those where I would surrender to the moment, and not be thinking of anything else, but just being there for him. And what can I do to love him and care for him in this moment? And I wouldn't be thinking of, oh, is he going to make it through this or not? It would just be, what can I do? And so I would be able to see, okay, I can, fix the pillow here, fix his leg here. There's this line that's under his arm, to remove that, and kind of, it was indenting into his arm, and I mean, he couldn't move. So doing all of that, or I'd massage his feet. And my dad was never sort of very touchy feely. He was actually, he would get uncomfortable, and he was very, and probably a trauma response in him as well, very independent, and I will take care of others, but I am sort of hesitant to be taken care of. Yet in those moments, he let me care for him. He could see that I was doing that, and there'd be no hesitation, because I would be looking at his face for cues, and I'd ask him permission sometimes. Can I massage your feet? And he'd nod and say yes, and I'd say, how does that feel? And moments were very intimate, and I got to know my dad in a whole other way. And my siblings didn't necessarily go into that depth, because it was hard. It required so much courage and being brave, but I knew in my heart at that time that there was just nowhere else I wanted to be. It just gave me comfort. The minute that I surrendered to that, even the pain and the suffering of everything he was going through, for those moments, it would lessen. Because all I would be in the frame of mind would be, okay, how can I attend to him with love? So to me, that was an expression of love that it was very different from when he was, not sick, or conversations we would have. A whole other dimension. When we were talking about intimacy,
yeah,
there was this moment that I had with my husband. This was a few days after my dad passed. The way that I got news of him transitioning was a phone call from the hospital at 2:30 a.m. saying that he had deteriorated and that we were to come in because there were some decisions to make, but please don't rush. And it's like, okay, he's probably towards the end, or maybe he's already gone, like the way that messaging was. So we're going there at 2:30 a.m., my brothers and I. And when we got there, it was a long walk to the ICU and long halls to go through. And I had this sense of this is the last time I'm going to be walking these halls to visit him or to go to him. Like was very much aware of that. So kind of taking in all and absorbing everything that was happening, very present for it. And then walking. We got to the doors, they automatically opened up because they probably pressed the button inside at a nursing station. And then somebody came and just put this cardboard box under the door to keep it open so it doesn't close shut. And she walked away. And there was no one there to receive us. No, and his room was the first room on the right. It was this glass door. The curtain had been pulled inside the door. And so my brother said, the curtain's pulled. And I said, is he dead? And he said, I don't know. And I said, okay, well, we need to go in. So we pressed the button to open the doors and open the curtains. And he was in a body bag. And I remember that moment hitting me like a ton of bricks, but not having time for that at that time because we had to deal with the situation. But I remember I like, whoa, and just like the shock of it. And I said, and my brother just froze there. I started crying. And I said, I want to see him. I want to see him though. I haven't seen him for a week, and then I opened the bag and he had probably passed very, like it hadn't been much time because he was still warm and his face looked like it was in pain and his body was in just such awful shape. His neck was all bruised. There was like everywhere they had taken out the lines, they were like all these gauzes, and he was dressed in that flimsy isolation gown, the yellow gown, and like an adult diaper, and there was blood in the diaper, and it's just like so jarring to see, And I kept wanting to see and touch him, and like he was still alive, like I would when I would visit. And what have they done to you, And I looked at his feet, and I'm like, gosh, and there was no one there. None of the physicians, none of the nurses. It's like wow, And then the resident came and, my brother said, what happened? And then he was just kind of telling us what happened. And then he looked at us and he said, well, you guys, how sick he's been for the last few weeks. And I mean, you're physicians, you kind of knew that he's been really sick. And I'm like, in my mind, I'm thinking, yeah, but this is our dad that just died. It's like, could there be some compassion? But all of that, like, I didn't have time to process any of that at that time, because then it was like in our faith or tradition, the burial and everything happens very quickly. It's part of honoring the deceased is to do all those steps quickly. So, and then there's a prayer that's done, and so we took him to Mecca for the prayer and the burial, and so all of those logistics had to be figured out. So we were also making the phone calls and our cousins and whatever, and the family members came and everyone helped us out. So we weren't alone. And then there's a final visitation at home for him to be brought home. I wanted him to leave from home and not from the hospital directly. And so we brought him home. So there was all of that going on. So there wasn't time to really process this. It came like 3 days later or 4 days later when I was talking to a colleague of mine who had also gone through, a colleague and really good friend of mine whose mom had passed away in ICU several months before that. And I found myself telling him the story and realizing as I was telling him how that moment had been for me and how I could have just shoved it away, but that moment came up and I was like livid and angry. And then after that, I told Adil about it, my husband, and then I cried so much after that. Like, I don't think I've cried as deeply and as, as deeply, like my heart was breaking so deeply at that moment. And I curled up in a ball and I just cried, like it was this deep cry. And he just stayed there. I think he laid down next to me as well or something, but he just let me curl up and just let me cry. He didn't say anything. And I cried for I don't know how long. And I said, God, I'm just so heartbroken. Like, why? Why was there no, like, they didn't let us see him for a week, and he was in such awful shape at the end. He died by himself. We weren't there next to him. And then he was in a body bag. Like, that's how they give us the news. Like, what the hell is wrong with people? And I'm going to remember this image for the rest of my life. Do they understand that? For them, it's just another person who passed. I get that part, but for us, it's that, like, that moment is seared in my mind. It just felt like they took away something very precious, the dignity of those moments. And then I said to him, this is going to be part of what I want moving forward. Like my mission in healthcare is to remind everybody, my colleagues, my friends, of the importance of this aspect of a person, a patient is a person, and their family members. It's as important, if not more, than the moments of health and wellness and when they get well and get out. Like this moment is what they will remember forever. And so how people show up for it is like healthcare workers. And we didn't need too much in that moment. Maybe just a word of kindness, like someone to be there with us when this was, or to tell us like he's passed, or not to like zip him in a body bag and just like boom, you show up there and it's like maybe just a sheet or something, or I don't know, or maybe he called us in a bit earlier when he was still, but they were just in a whole different mindset. So that moment with the deal was big, and that's where I knew that a huge shift had happened for both of us. And I remember feeling like my heart was breaking so much. Like I felt like I kept, sinking and sinking and sinking into this pain, like it would never stop. But then half an hour later, I was able to get up and it was lighter, and I was able to move forward.
What some listeners may not recognize is the duality that you had to go through of these other physicians understanding that you're a physician, yet not seeing that you're a daughter of the patient.
Yes.
And which role do they present to you? And so now moving forward, like you just said, you want to bring this experience to the other physicians to be aware that when it is a family member, no matter what the role, we have to serve the relationship and see the human in the person. Meditation is exactly like you described in the hospital. It's showing up in the reality of what life is, not in a room that you are being able to control the settings and make everything so quiet. Meditation is actually showing up with whatever is present and being with it all and not just blocking it out. And like you said, it takes a lot of courage and bravery to just keeping your heart open with all that and still going forward, even though there's like the unknown and the uncertainty. And that is what meditation is. We have the practice, yes, of sitting and clearing out and purging and all that. Yet the whole reason why you do that is so that you can be in the meditation of life. And when it gets spiritual, like you just mentioned, when you are seeing the fragility of life and that it's having to be sustained by and supported by so many other things, that takes a lot of courage.
Yeah.
And the way you're describing it, that is what spirituality is. That is what meditation is. Not all the unicorn shitting rainbows and everything's la la and we're just going to go zen and everything. It's like, no, it's actually being human and showing up with the process of it all.
Yeah.
And the ebbs and flows of it all.
Yeah.
And it takes a courage of going into that intimacy too. And I remember us messaging and I was offering, some suggestions for that intimacy too of, just brush his hair, treat him like a little child. And it can be difficult to do that to our parents that have always not accepted tenderness, don't know how to receive that kindness from others and being vulnerable in that state. And I remember you sharing the intimacy of being able to brush and care for him and being so tender with him and allowing him to be opening up to that receiving and that loving. And I appreciate you sharing that and being living proof that it is possible. It's not easy.
No, not easy.
It sucks.
Not easy. And I needed a lot of support through it, and sort of inner and outer, and my inner support was I prayed a lot. Like I had these prayers I would say, and I had these beads that I prayed with. And every time I would hold on to them and I would pray, after I was done, like massaging his feet or whatever, adjusting, helping the nurses adjust him. And then I would sit on the chair next to him. I'd have I don't think I've prayed so much in all my life. And I would feel the presence of God, with me. Like it was like this tender, embrace. And it was this compassionate, tender, gentle energy kind of embracing me and uplifting me that wasn't like it was coming from external. Like I knew this wasn't just me. There was this bigger presence with me. And it held me all throughout and was very much there. So even I'm speaking about it right now, I can feel it again. Like and it brought this calmness with it, this sense of you're okay. And that didn't mean you're not in pain and all of that. But you can hold this. You can make room for this. And my heart would stretch and make room for it, And so there's definitely this expansion of the heart and or it would break and then it would kind of remold and this time it would be bigger. Like there was all of that. And then in that praying at home as well, to all the places of worship that bring me comfort. And like I did a lot of that. It grounded me. It gave me a place to belong, to rest in. And then I would get that energy and show up for the very practical, the very messy, the very scary aspects of it all. Seeing him bleed and bleed and bleed, for example, like that was in front of me, the whole bed was soaked with blood. And I'd be like, is he going to bleed to death today? The day that I helped the nurse clean him up when he had so much blood under him, that he was bleeding. Like I remember those moments. And so there was there were these forces with me, I mean, there's no doubt in my mind of them there. I couldn't see them, but they were there around me, holding me and supporting me. So I was never alone, even though I would be sitting by myself at his bedside because we weren't allowed, like there was only one person at a time and it was quite strict. I didn't feel alone.
Is there anything that you'd like to share with the listeners or you think that would be helpful for them?
I'm going to reflect on that and see what comes through. I would say it's not a luxury to wake up to your life. It's not like something you do on retreats, and we need to wake up now, and waking up isn't like this whole fancy complex spiritual thing. Just wake up to time is again not obsessing, but time is going. It is ticking. Now is the time to do what you need to do. What is it that you've been putting on hold? For me, it's the book. I've just gotten into it and I'm put myself some goals and every day I do some writing because I keep thinking I have time. And it's like, what are you waiting for? Just do it. That thing that you've been holding off or waiting to be ready for, or maybe when I this or that, like that dream, that whatever, that phone call, that whatever it is, just do it. Wake up and do it. And that's how I'm approaching life. Just do it. Just say it.
How has trust with yourself been through this experience?
It's grown. It's grown. I've the part of me that is more willing to trust myself. There were parts that were not necessarily that used to kind of outsource some of that trust to others. And if X person validates this decision, then I'm on the right path. And one of those people was my dad. But when I look back, he actually never told me what to do. He would ask me what I wanted, and he would ask me my thought process. Like, have you thought it through? Like if I was buying something new or whatever, well, have you thought through the budget and can you afford it? And he wouldn't say, is it right or wrong? He would say, have you thought it through? And I would be like, yeah. And then he'd be like, well, then it sounds like you know what you're doing. And I think that's what is probably the part that I miss the most when I think now to my dad is the part that reflected back to me and gave me permission to trust myself. And I think that's probably the message that I needed to hear today from myself as well is I trusted myself to go there. I trusted myself to travel with my family. I trusted myself to show up at his bedside the way I did. And so that relationship of trust is growing. And I trust myself right now, even though I can see people around me not giving me back that same mirroring that he would of yes, probably because those people who are not giving that back to me haven't necessarily developed that trust with themselves. So they're still looking for external parameters to say this is how I need to live. Yet here I am, like forging sort of a different path than a lot of my peers in healthcare or my friends around me, or my path looks different. So it does, to many, it feels like I've fallen off the deep end into woo-woo land. But to me, it feels like this is the right path. So definitely grown and continues to grow. The trust, I mean.
I want to thank you for being on the podcast and having such an intimate, open conversation and sharing such a very fragile, delicate experience that you're still going through, and being open to share it with so many. I appreciate and I value our relationship. So thank you for being here with me.
Thank you for this opportunity. I'm very grateful. I'm probably going to have, a vulnerability hangover or something after this. It's like, oh my God, you share too much. But no, I think what needed to be said was said. I'm very grateful. Thank you.
Remember to be kind and gentle with yourself.
Continuing to do so. And you too.
I will. Thank you for making it all the way to the end. This podcast had a lot of discomfort and triggers. Know that there is help out there. You do not have to do it alone. The strongest thing you can do for yourself is ask for help. If you found anything relevant or think anyone would benefit from this conversation, please share it out. Help grow Lift Oneself. Help grow the community. Until next time, remember, be kind and tender with yourself. You matter.